I've had my Steam Deck for nearly a year at this point. My pre-release Steam Deck arrived in late February last year, and I have been incredibly happy with it since then. But that's just me. It seems there's a small but incredibly vocal minority of folks who want new Steam Deck hardware already, because PC gaming, I guess? I don't know. So let's dig into the criticism and see what all the fuss is about. Let's attempt to unravel the confusing cries of Steam Deck's obsolescence. Now, the screen is probably the biggest complaint some people have with the deck, and to some degree I can see why. The deck screen isn't as vibrant as an OLED, its black levels aren't amazing, and truthfully, bright and saturated colors leave something to be desired. We could sit here all day and compare the Steam Deck screen to an OLED, but you know what? In a direct head-to-head comparison, the deck screen is the clear loser to an OLED. I won't argue that point. But the question is, are you actually going to do that? Are you going to compare the Steam Deck screen to any other? People who just want to play games certainly won't. Such comparisons between a monitor, a phone, a tablet, and the Steam Deck just aren't natural. The deck's form factor doesn't lend itself or even suggest that that is something you should do. Similarly, another issue that I've heard harped on is that the screen's resolution is only 1280 by 800, and 1280 by 800 is objectively a much smaller number than 1920 by 1080. Now, if this was like the mid-90s and we were children who didn't know any better, then I could understand the bigger number better mentality.
Let's review the numbers. Sega Genesis is 16 bits, 3DO is 32 bits, the Atari Jaguar is 64 bits. Which is more advanced? Clifford! Jaguar!
The fact is, the 1280 by 800 screen is actually a benefit to the system, not a problem with it. First, the screen being 7 inches and having a resolution of 800p means that the pixel density of the Steam Deck screen is nearly that of a Retina display. Furthermore, the GPU has to do about a quarter of the work that a 1080p screen would demand. And finally, a lower screen resolution means less power consumption and consequently a better battery life. So to recap, if the deck had a 1080p OLED screen, that would directly translate to worse performance and 4 to 5 times the power consumption that the current screen requires. With all that being said, I think it's kind of a no-brainer to suggest that Valve stick with 800p for several generations of the Steam Deck to come. Next up, the battery. Now, the Steam Deck's battery can be quite limited. Valve knows it, you know it, I know it. And when playing the latest AAA games at 40 plus frames a second, you would be hard-pressed to squeeze more than an hour and a half of gameplay out of it. But I have found that in other gaming scenarios, I can get 5 or more hours of gameplay off a single charge. The thing is, I've never really thought of the Steam Deck as a battery-powered device. To me, it's more of a living room sofa device where you have power handily available. Emily and I are often playing Steam Deck together on our sofa, and we're sharing a single charger between us as needed. We've never run into an issue where both of us needed the charger at the same time. See, lightweight games like Spelunky 2, Stardew Valley, or Hades, older AAA games like BioShock, Left 4 Dead 2, or Portal 2, and many other games perform spectacularly well in terms of battery life. Most of them don't even kick on the fan on the Steam Deck, and when games practically sip power, you can get an enormous amount of game time off a single charge. This is due in no small part to Valve's incredibly optimized custom APU from AMD, but we'll get to that in a second. It's definitely fair to say that the battery on the Steam Deck is a bit of a mixed bag. But for indie games, or for playing games that are in your back catalog, you're going to get extremely impressive battery life for a device of this caliber. Now, Valve knows that these 2 points, the screen and the battery, are the Steam Deck's weakest. In an interview with The Verge back in December, quote, Valve has repeatedly confirmed that the Steam Deck is a multi-generational product and new versions are on the way. What will they include? When I asked Yang and Grafay for the pain points they wanted to address in a sequel, they had nearly identical answers: screen and battery life. Now, if Valve came out tomorrow with a new hardware revision with a larger battery and an 800p OLED screen, I probably wouldn't complain, so long as it wasn't billed as new Steam Deck or a Steam Deck 2. But honestly, that's not what most people are talking about when they say that the deck is obsolete. Now, before we continue, I have to ask, why haven't you liked that smash button yet? Once you do, you'll be well on your way to seeing more videos just like this one. You can also subscribe if that's more your speed. I make at least 2 videos a week about Steam Deck and Linux gaming, so get subscribed so that you don't miss that. And now back to it. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is the storage. Now, the storage is definitely an area where Valve could do more. If they came out with another SKU that included a 1TB NVMe, that would be an entirely valid thing for them to do. It would definitely earn brownie points with the bigger number better crowd, but is it necessary? I'd say meh. The fact is, you can expand your storage with a 1TB SD card and it performs phenomenally well. I have a 1TB SD card for my Steam Deck and I have over 100 games installed across the internal and external drives. And guess how many of those 100 games I play regularly? 5, maybe 6. Now, I'm definitely not everyone, but I find that the more options I have, the less I want to make a decision. And that's a common human condition called choice anxiety. Having more games installed on my Steam Deck doesn't lead to me having more fun. It often leads to me not being able to make a decision about which game to play. I also tend to play smaller indie titles that take up less disk space than other games. So 512 gigabytes internal plus 1TB external is plenty for me. Though I am amenable to the fact that others like to play games that consume hundreds of gigabytes in a single install. So would I complain if Valve introduced a 1TB model? No. Now, so far, I've been pretty down on most of these ideas. But one thing I could definitely get behind with future Steam Deck hardware would be more expandability, namely Thunderbolt, or more realistically, USB 4 support, and preferably 2 USB ports. This would mean that Valve would basically support external GPUs while the deck is docked to a TV. That would make the Steam Deck an absolute beast. And if there was a dock that had a discrete graphics card slot and an M.2 slot, well, that would be a recipe for the best console on the market, bar none. While I have numerous docks and USB-C dongles, expansion on the deck is limited to USB 3.2 Gen 2. Having PCIe exposed via one or more USB ports would be a game changer for this thing. Though I will admit that many of my suggestions here kind of defeat the purpose of a handheld, I would love to see eGPU support on the deck. Next up is the APU. Now, I have seen some people say that the Steam Deck's APU is already being outperformed by the Ryzen 7 6800U, and they want to see a new Steam Deck with the 6800U instead of the custom silicon commissioned by Valve. Now, let's compare the deck's processor with that of the AMD 6800U, shipping in so-called competing handhelds, to determine exactly why that's such a bad idea. The 6800U has 8 cores, 16 threads, 12 RDNA 2 cores at 2200 MHz, a base clock of 2.7 GHz, and a boost clock of 4.7 GHz. And the deck's APU has 4 cores, 8 threads, 8 RDNA 2 cores at 1600 MHz, a base clock of 2.4 GHz, and a boost clock of up to 3.5 GHz. So objectively, the Steam Deck seems to be about half as good looking at these numbers, right? But all of that performance has to come from somewhere. The 6800U runs at 45 watts. The deck, just 15. The Steam Deck's battery is 40 watt-hours, meaning that running the 6800U at full throttle while maybe squeezing out a few extra frames per second over the Steam Deck's GPU would likely mean running the battery down to 0 in less than an hour. The deck's APU typically gets over an hour in pretty much any scenario. But I think the final nail in the coffin of the 6800U is its memory bandwidth. The chip supports up to 4800 mega transfers per second with DDR5 RAM, and the deck 5500. And with an APU, those 700 mega transfers per second make all of the difference. Now, this might not seem like a fair comparison because the deck uses LPDDR5, and the 6800U supports LPDDR5 faster than the Steam Deck. But in most PCs that ship with the 6800U, they come with the cheaper and slower DDR5. The final issue that I want to tackle is, it's a PC, it's a year old, therefore it's obsolete. Is it though? I mean, is it even a PC? Valve's mass producing a handheld gaming device. Check. Heavily subsidizing the cost. Check. Shipping it with a custom operating system that's designed for video games. Check. It comes with a custom controller. Check. And features a first-party online storefront to purchase games from. Check. That sounds to me like the textbook definition of a console. And I think the only way it could be more of a console is if it didn't have the same performance as a top-of-the-line PC. Check. Or maybe if it was locked into a proprietary ecosystem of apps and services. So I guess that's the only way that it's not really a console. Now there's this pervasive, absurd, and wasteful idea in the PC gaming world that hardware that's older than a year or two is obsolete. That's bananas to me. Both our living room PC and Emily's gaming rig are still running NVIDIA Titan X Pascal graphics cards. These are GPUs manufactured in 2016, yet they're still as performant as this rig's RTX 3080. We can even play games in 4K on the Titan X without it breaking so much of a sweat. Heck, my home server is still using my GTX 970 from 2014, and I can stream many games at respectable frame rates from it. So this idea of discarding useful hardware in the name of PC gaming perfection is silly at best and offensive at worst. In 3 to 5 years, when you might think that new AAA games won't be playable on today's Steam Deck, it still has some tricks up its sleeve. Every single Steam Deck in the wild today has the exact same specifications. Developers can build and optimize their games for this hardware. The Steam API can tell a game that is being played on the deck, and if developers wanted to, they could make a performance profile for their game that would work well on the deck. And this is not unprecedented. The Nintendo Switch has 6-year-old hardware, maybe 7-year-old hardware, and it's still going strong. Hundreds of games every year get ported over to the Switch, and that's with its exotic Tegra SoC that requires a ton of extra work from the developers to port. Do you know what it takes to port a PC game to the Steam Deck? Nothing. The developer can run performance benchmarks and figure out what graphical settings work the best, and then set them as the default for deck players. So in 5 years, when the latest games come out, well, guess what? There's a good chance that they'll still play great at 800p on medium settings. See, the fact is, if you're the kind of person who annually spends thousands of dollars on dedicated PC hardware, then you're probably never going to be happy with any potential Steam Deck 2, no matter what its specs or capabilities are. Sadly, the bigger number better crowd doesn't seem to know what the meaning of the word compromise is. And the Steam Deck's compromise is simple. It's not trying to compete with Ion Neo or GPD devices. It's not trying to replace your gaming rig. Heck, it's not even trying to be a PC. It aims to be a handheld that lets you play your games with even more freedom than a PC can afford. And for that, I think it's nearly perfect. It could withstand a few minor hardware revisions over the next few years, but it has the wherewithal to stand the test of time as it is. Look, I'll be playing my Steam Deck for years to come, and I think that I'll be keeping up with the latest games without much of an issue at all. But I would like to know what you think. How long do you think the current Steam Deck hardware will be relevant? Do you agree or disagree with any of my points I made in this video? Sound off in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I want to give a special shout out to my friends on Patreon and my YouTube members. It's because of these fine folks that I've been able to grow this show into what it's become today. If you believe in the work that I'm doing here, you can use the links below to become a Steam Deck warrior on Patreon or as a YouTube member. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I'll see you next time.